So this is farming with the hidden half of nature. And there you can see a poor little garden advisory service is getting trodden in the middle of an urban jungle, everyone going to work and nobody's listening to them. So a modernist perspective of the hidden half of nature, or what we can't see, what is invisible, is this electromagnetic spectrum that we can understand that most of what's going on in the world is not visible to the human eye, and it doesn't come into visible light. And there's a lot of our technologies which are run on this electromagnetic spectrum on other wavelengths that we can't see, and we understand that. But then if we're looking at an indigenous perspective of the invisible, the elements and the elementals as building blocks of nature, this is earth, fire, wind and water, and they each have a spiritual or an energetic counterpart. And this is just an example of I say, indigenous perspective, and that's a really umbrella term for many, an innumerable number of worldviews, not just from the South, the global South, or the majority world, but also from industrialized nations. It's almost like our birthright. If we're humans, we can connect to nature, and there has been that tradition for millennia everywhere in the world. So if we're looking at indigenous worldviews versus this more modernist perspective of working with nature and farming, the column on the left shows sort of typical, stereotypical examples of an indigenous paradigm, and on the right there's the modernist paradigm. So whereas on the left, indigenous paradigm might be striving in nature and farming to work for balance and harmony, the modernist paradigm is striving for increased productivity. An indigenous perspective might be looking at rhythms and cycles in nature and in the world. And from a modernist perspective, it's more repetitive and linear in terms of time and cycles. So an indigenous perspective is working with oneness with nature, that we are one with nature, whereas a modernist one has dominion over nature. You can go through this whole table like this, seeing life as holistic and complex, or reducing life to a set of component parts, having a focus on health and wellness, or having a focus on illness and disease. And the one I really want to highlight here in this workshop is that an indigenous perspective has more of a sense of panpsychism or animism, which is recognizing that everything has a consciousness or a mind. There's an energetic dimension to life, a consciousness that we can connect with, and then that leads into communicative consciousness as well. Whereas a modernist paradigm can be one of materialism or secular materialism. And we can look at this and think, well, what is agroecology? Where does agroecology fit? And when we're farming, what kind of worldviews do we have when we're farming, if we're being honest about this? And I would say that modernist agroecology does tend to still have a worldview that is a more secular, materialistic one. If we look at some of, and this is from sort of modernist cultures who are, working with organic farming, permaculture, agroecology, they're still very much based in the material, even though they do say that that they're gaining a lot of knowledge and embracing indigenous wisdom and indigenous farming systems. What's being taught and what's being practiced is still very much rooted in the material still. And some of, say, Bill Mollison, the co-founder of permaculture, was very much against what he called bringing one's belief system into farming and into permaculture. And it's quite a paradox that actually biodynamic farming, as on the right-hand side of this slide, and Rudolf Steiner, is the only sort of modernist farming system which shares a very similar worldview with indigenous cultures. But it doesn't claim to be based on traditional or indigenous farming, but it shares a very similar ontology or worldview. So if we can look at this in a different way, we're looking at farming approaches, and how can we reclaim then this hidden half of nature? And if we look at this grid from one extreme, on vertical, we can farm in a way that embraces complexity, or we can farm in a way that looks at nature in a reductionist to piecemeal system. We can farm in a way that recognizes the invisible realm on the horizontal, or in a way that only focuses on the material. And if we look at industrial farming or conventional farming, that's clearly squarely placed in a worldview which looks at components of a whole rather than the whole, and it's rooted in the material. Well, if we look at agroecology, you know, I would propose that a lot of it is still looking at the material realm, even though it does embrace complexity as well as reductionism. So subtle agroecologies would be the counterpart of modernist agroecology that starts to bring in the invisible realm. And then altogether we have holism. You know, holism isn't just looking at the visible material, it's looking at the visible and the invisible. So why is this important? You know, well, two reasons, well, many reasons, but two reasons are put forward here. One is that how can we transform the food system if we don't transform our worldview that created the food system that we have now? And you know, there's been a lot of talk in this conference about the underlying power and control in the food system. And could that be a result of the underlying material or secular material insecurities in humankind, especially in the West? So how are we going to address the underlying causes for the need for power and control, rather than just trying to fight against power and control? So those are just two reasons why this is crucially important. It's not, and the Western mind or the left brain often likes to try and sweep aside these things and say, well, we'll deal with these niceties once we've, you know, dealt with climate change or all the other physical material things that are going on, but they all have an invisible counterpart that we need to address at the same time. So just wrapping up really on this session, it's just, you know, what is subtle agroecologies? And this is just a definition. I'm saying it's not a farming system in itself, but it superimposes a non-material dimension upon existing materially based agroecological farming systems. And it's grounded in the lived experiences of humans working on and with the land and with nature over thousands of years to the present. And then here's just a selection of some practices that we could call subtle agroecological practices. Again, that's just a term, we could call it many things. So we're looking at things like applying homeopathy in agriculture, using feng shui, paramagnetism, which is the power of magnetism in nature, ritual, prayer and intention, the role of our human intuition, chanting, the use of teacher plants, sacred geometry, the use of sound or ultrasound, biodynamic preparations, astronomy or planting calendars. I mean, this is an alphabetical order, and in practice, many people who are practicing this use lots of various of these techniques all together. And it's not just to increase yields, they have multiple benefits all at the same time. This is just simplifying it really. So I just wanted to finish with this poem. It's by Chief Dan George, who's a First Nation Canadian chief, and he was a poet, an author and an actor. And he wrote this. He said, "If you talk to animals, they will talk with you, and you will know each other. If you do not talk to them, you will not know them. And what you do not know, you will fear. And what one fears, one destroys." And that's what's been happening. So that's just a brief overview from my perspective, coming from a research centre of subtle agroecologies. I'd just like to stop sharing that now and hand over to Richard Gantlett, who is going to talk to you a bit about his experiences on his farm. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Julia. What if the living world beyond us was on our team? What if nature was on our team? Welcome to England, the land of Stonehenge, Glastonbury, and Avebury. We are growing our soil at Yatesbury, agroecologically, regeneratively, sustainably, naturally, organically, and biodynamically. Oh, and perhaps subtly too. Sorry, that's not very subtle. I'm going to share with you a story, part of my story. A traditional rural pastime, no campfire, sorry. It's going to include wonder, observation, health, and self-organization. My story starts when I was a conventional farmer in the 1990s. I remember saying to my agronomist, all we need to do is put a roof over every field and we can control everything. And in that moment, I was horrified that that was the direction we were going. In my head at that time, I had a picture of this field in the slide, but with the soil bare and pale. I can see now that it was essentially devoid of life. I can still visualize it. Today, it looks like this in the slide, a diversity of flowers, legumes, herbs, and grasses. In fact, our farm has changed a great deal since then. Looking to the top left, you can see some trees. They're in the right-hand bottom corner now, on a frosty morning last week. We are looking east over Windmill Hill towards Avebury. Wave if you've been to Avebury. To continue my story, organic conversion for our land followed in 1998. Probably conversion for me too. But it struck me that we were seated in an area favoured by people a long time ago. Farming is a destructive activity, certainly from the point of view of tillage, such as ploughing. But we need tillage to grow vegetables and annual crops. So I was searching for ways to enhance our farming system, to more than make up for any negative impacts. I was looking, in fact, for what Julia, our chair, would call lost indigenous knowledge or wisdom. We seem to be surrounded by it, being so close to Avebury. 5,500 years ago, Windmill Hill was a busy site. Apparently the largest and one of the earliest Neolithic causewayed enclosures in the UK. And I was curious as to why here. In the centre top right is Avebury Stone Circle. We've got a little close up. And far top right is Silbury Hill, right in the distance. There's a close up. With pottery from Cornwall and a stone axe from the Lake District. People living on Windmill Hill must have had some good parties. To digress for a moment, wonder. It's one of my favourite words. This novel coronavirus has given us a great deal. Apart from tragedies, it has given us an opportunity to change. So some questions for you all. Please wave if you've walked more in the past year. Who's noticed nature more? Who has wondered at the beauty of nature more and more? I'm really pleased to see so many hands waving. Thank you across the globe. Even 2 or 3 from Australia, I think. Now close your eyes. No peeking. Take yourself to your favourite beautiful spot in summer. I'm sure you have one. What do you see? Hold that thought for a moment. We'll come back to it. This is one of my favourite spots. My education has been mostly of a scientific nature. I'm even finishing a PhD on soil regeneration just now. So my story is deeply embedded in science, with the scientific method of experimentation and a good deal of critical thinking. which can be annoying to those around me. But science is about exploring the unknown. My wonder of our natural world is channeled through my passion for science, particularly in exploring the unknown beneath our feet. Back in the late 1990s, when looking for something positive to counter our invasive farming methods, I came across a lovely book called Secrets of the Soil by Tompkins and Bird. In there was a chapter about the late Alex Podolinsky, which grabbed my attention. He was an inspiring farmer, teacher, and became a friend. He pioneered the biodynamic method in Australia, which now has an energetic following around Europe. Alex reinforced the importance of observational skills. However small or large the adjustments that we make within our sphere of influence, we have to be able to demonstrate the outcomes in a practical and physical way, especially to farmers. Alex taught what he called active perception, a method for seeing the processes going on beyond what is in front of you. For example, looking at plants and seeing the health of the soil in which the plants are embedded. Now please close your eyes again and return to your beautiful place, the one that you're still holding. Look at the living plants and through their manifestation, envisage how healthy the soil is beneath. How vibrant are the plants, the leaves and the branches? And what form do they take? Are they upright or prostrate? What color are they? Can you see through and among the plants? Do they flow or are they static? I'm sure you do this same process when seeing friends or relations. You look well, you might say, or perhaps not, and then I'm sure you wouldn't say it, but their outward appearance portrays their inner health. Health, yes, another favorite word of mine. More recently, I've been involved in a brilliant farm health project. 16 farmers from Germany, Austria, and the UK were picked by their peers as examples of having healthy farming systems and came up with 10 principles of health. What would you include? What would you say makes a healthy farm system healthy? The most interesting statement to me is that farmers who run healthy farming systems listen to their gut feeling. So that's number 5 on the list. Observation and intuition were seen as 2 key principles. I think both of these are quite subtle. Subtle agroecologies, perhaps. A year ago, I came across this wonderful Danish expression for checking your gut feeling. Sticky finger jorden, which translates as stick a finger in the soil. I rather like this. I think it's lovely. The Danish idea is that to test a situation, you stick your finger in the soil. Brilliant. Not very subtle, but indigenous, perhaps. My last point is about self-organization. How does the living world beyond us organize itself? It is clearly self-organized. One only has to look at the aggregation of soil particles to see this in soil. But perhaps we can see more easily this with our naked eye all around us. To organize organisms must take communication. How do they communicate? How does that work? Here's a great video to get you started. Some bedtime reading, if you haven't seen it already. or viewing, if you like. And there's a good deal of books about fungal networks, which I'm sure many of you have read. The soil has also been likened to the inside of a cow's stomach, laid flat upon the earth. So are the mycorrhizal fungal hyphae of the soil actually the equivalent of nerves or neurons in our body? They are certainly sending electrochemical signals along their networks. Perhaps the soil is more the brain of the earth than the stomach, or maybe it's both. At a single organism level in the body, you or me, for example, the term homeostasis is used to describe how we adapt to change. Not just being resilient, but able to develop like an Olympic athlete that undoubtedly we all could be. Homeostasis, the third and final of my favorite words for today. This requires two key notions of a harmonious whole, which is critical, and orchestration. Similarly, in ecology, the study of ant colonies and plant communities have led to understandings of cooperation rather than competition in harmonious whole communities. Evidence for the self-organization of soil was also mentioned above already. So where am I going with this, you might well ask? Well, if we look at our farm as a whole, one whole organism in homeostasis, we can see that it can be largely self-organizing, so long as we have one harmonious whole. Indeed, we farm our farm as one single farm organism. Each piece of the farm is dependent and indivisible from the other. It's one of the key biodynamic principles. And its health starts with the self-organized life in the soil. What I find so exciting is that this process empowers farmers everywhere to create their own beautiful farms, individual farms, where every farm is different, being more adaptable, more interesting. I think when we perceive the beauty in nature, it is health or optimum homeostasis that we see. A wonderful thing it is. If you want to find out more about us, then search Yatesby Wicks or follow us on Instagram at Yatesby Farm. I'll leave you with this final thought. What would the world be like if we all consciously had nature on our team? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was lovely to see your beautiful farm, and we'll be posting some links at the end as well to your farm and the area. And it's a lovely place if anyone is in the UK and can visit it. But you can see it on Richard's web pages as well. I just want to now go over to Patrick MacManaway, who's going to talk to us about his perspective, what he's as a farm advisor and practitioner, and what he's doing. And how, Patrick, are you there?
I am here.
Hello.
Thank you. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Greetings, everybody, and Julia, Richard, thank you so much for including me on team today. Really a pleasure and huge privilege to speak in this conference in this format with you both. So my job here then is to share just some sort of scientific and practical contextual thoughts about the framework of consciousness and the mechanism, and some results from direct communication with soils, with plants, with water, etc. Apparently it can and does happen when we literally put our minds to it. how does that happen, and what's possible, which of course will remain an open question. So I'm going to just share my screen and put us up a PowerPoint here. So looking then at a paradigm of vibrational communication, where communication and dialogue can occur at a vibrational level within us, with the vibrational intelligences within, behind, and as Richard and Julia have suggested, actually organizing the interface, interaction and coherence of the system as a whole. So quantum and other physics give us an understanding that our intelligence, our consciousness, our spirit, ours and that of everything else, is fundamentally vibrational in nature. And Plato tells us that the gods are numbers. So our consciousness is defined by the frequency and the waveform of our consciousness. So very old consciousness, very old paradigm, this thousands of years old. The understanding of consciousness as a pattern and expression of vibration, subsequently clothed in matter, as Richard was saying. If the spirit of the organism as a whole is strong and healthy, then there's a physical expression of that that's apparent. So the hidden half of nature then is looking at this vibrational aspect, which it transpires is literally the full engagement of the creative powers and perceptual powers of our imaginations, intuitions, and instincts, obviously then manifest through practical and rational and common sense application, but understanding that the unseen is the patterning consciousness, and then the expressed, visible, is an expression of the health and vitality of that. So we think of traditionally the relationship between person and place literally was expressed as husbandry. Now we have agricultural science, which, as Julia was pointing out, moves us into a different frame of mind when we're conceptualizing and experiencing this work. And certainly, just echoing some of Richard's comments, one of my clients, a blueberry grower in Connecticut, after falling in love with farming and then spending 20 years battling with chemistry and pesticides, the terrible things that challenged his blueberries, he went biodynamic. And when he spoke to me 5 years later, he had a twinkle in his eyes and he said, "Now I can go back to church." And he'd found his sacred relationship again, that his farm was a marriage, was sacred, was not an area of conflict or adversity, but one in which the imagination, the emotion, the intuition, and the practical expressions arising from those could be fully expressed as within a human partnership of any kind. And so we have a long tradition of understanding that really there's much more than this, of a contractual agreement with land, as it were, and anybody who's married will know that it's not quite enough to say "I love you" once before the day. It's an engaged relationship, and so we want to think of ourselves as being married to the land, at least in this agricultural context, and perhaps absolutely at all times. So the questions that we're asking today, we've been asking for thousands of years and probably forever. What is the substance or the medium which connects us all? The mycorrhizal, the electromagnetic, the collective consciousness, and many terms we find for it, traditional terms. The ether is Plato's word. Chi we have from the Orient. Prana is our Hindu term. Noom comes from the Kalahari bush people, old organ, animating life force. Everybody's been over this all over forever. It's the great question and mystery, as it were. What is the substance, the vibration, the universal language of thought and feeling that truly connects human consciousness with all other consciousness and all consciousness together as a coherent entity. I think that we're talking about exactly the same stuff with our contemporary language of current science, the electricity and magnetism, gravity, weak and strong nuclear forces. I think that list can go on actually for another 16 or 20 if you're truly into all the interactions. But this is just another language map for what we've always been asking, is what are the dynamic interplays between the conscious mind and the things around it, and how do systems organize themselves based upon what principles. And we find really that the indigenous principles from all around the world, Richard is a representative of our indigenous UK tradition. His land has been farmed for 6,500 years sustainably, and continues to thrive under his custodianship. So there's deep wisdom in the land there from ancient practices that kept it going this long, as well as all of the more and new understandings as plant and climate and economic circumstances shift our practices. But that core has been there in the land for 6,500 years that we know of. And so these principles have been well applied for a long time. We're not making them up, we're trying to regain them. And one of my wise teachers said, I seek not to follow the footsteps of the men and women of old, I seek what they sought. And so I think we want our contemporary approach to perennial universal wisdom that's there for us, waiting for us always to see. In application, human love is rocket fuel for living systems. Anything that we love, we energize, we bring to life, we give power wherever we place our attention. Often that's all that's needed. When we establish a rapport of love first and then add specific request, intention, desire for outcome, preferment of crop, preferment of weather conditions to support whatever our rotational pattern is, or our landscape management. And then once we're into intention, we're into dialogue, either telepathically or through processes of dowsing or instinct or intuition, claircognizance, muscle testing, lots of different ways we can establish, either directly or sort of by email, or as it were, with the vibrational intelligences of nature, what our needs are and how to guide with them in consult, best practice, planting dates, times, rotational pattern, etc. Beyond that, lots of uses of sound with wonderful effects, plant and animal geomagnetism. Julia referenced the amount of paramagnetic material in the soil is significant to the vibrational aspect of soil fertility, Schumann resonances, biodynamic preparations, classical homeopathy, radionics. We can sort of break the list down and go along, but we've got a very long and diverse tradition of using many techniques, and sometimes they don't get shared, as in a conference like this, because people are just working on their own, doing their own thing. So wonderful opportunity just to sort of have a mind share here. But moving on just for time. So like fish surrounded by ocean, we literally live in an ocean of electromagnetic vibration, a tiny wafer of which we perceive as visible light. But that spectrum of oceanic ether, vibrational bioelectromagnetism is sort of infinitely large and small. Our thoughts and feelings are down at this bottom end in the low frequency range. And so there's no difference between our thoughts than sunlight, except for how slow or quick the wave is reaching the beach. Earth is a magnetic cavity, is full of these resonances, the full spectrum that we just saw. And each of us has our own resonant cavity, our own toroidal bubble of consciousness, whereby focusing our mind, we can choose, just like a radio set, which resonances, which frequencies, which thoughts, which feelings, which intentions we choose to hold in that space. And so perhaps if we could see ourselves from outside ourselves, looking at the hidden half of the person as well as the hidden half of nature, the pardon me, we can see the person there, but what we're not seeing, but we can perceive in various ways, is this vibrational space around us, with the vibrational communications of thought and feeling coming out and interacting with everything in our environment surrounding us. The Schumann resonance is the thing that ties us to our planet. It's the dominant frequency of our planet. It's the organizing central frequency in our own brains, the midpoint of these 4 octaves. And we're seeing the 4 states of consciousness of the human mind in simple form. And just to observe deep dreamless sleep, very low frequency, imaginal space, meditative, theta, that's where we meet the elementals, the mycorrhizal fungi, the soil organisms, the elementals. Alpha, the relaxed calm, that's where we can easily meet nature spirits, plants, devic elements. Once we're into beta, we're kind of just into human mind. And so one of the tiebacks to Julia's points was, if we're in rational mind, we're in beta consciousness, and that literally separates us from the consciousness of the ecosystem that we're seeking to interact with, support, facilitate, and manage. So literally we need to get out of our minds and put our fingers in the soil and drop back into alpha and theta to reconnect with the organizing intelligence that we're describing here. Let me just keep moving through these slides. The waveform that we express, these are the shapes of the waves of our minds, of our feelings. We're literally throwing off an electromagnetic vibration all of the time. This holds a universal language, and we can see it, as I'm sure many of you have, photographed as its imprint in water. Here, Dr. Emoto shows us on the left an ice crystal frozen from severely polluted water, the photo on the right, the same water refrozen after having blessed. So we can see that the vibrational coherence from loving intention has transformed the organizing pattern of the water in this circumstance. And we can see, and I encourage you to go and look if you aren't already familiar with these. These are all the coherence re-achieved in the patterning of water, simply from giving gratitude, applying compassion, etc. And we can see that we can degrade that medium very easily with negative intentions, discordance of various kinds. So then practical applications. There's a long tradition of blessing water in many cultures, in many traditions. From the north of England, where the well dressings and gratitude and love is offered to a water source, through indigenous traditions around the world, here a new borehole being blessed. And then say, but what does this actually do? We've seen those pictures of coherence with the water. So a story to tell, 120 paddocks in New South Wales grazed by sheep, and rotational grazing. Sheep are moved every day, paddocks are rested for weeks at a time before being regrazed, classical regen ag. Half of the paddocks were watered by shallow ponds, by dams in the field, and half from a single central borehole into troughs. And on a lovely day, gathering day, with RCS Australia, we had 30 farmers gather, and we had this kind of chat in the morning, and then we went around finding things to bless on the farm. And we blessed the borehole, and we did before and after taste testing on the water. And we convinced ourselves that it was much more delicious and refreshing after we'd given it a good old blessing and lots of love. And then off we all went. And then I got the most amazing feedback from the farmer, which was that after we'd done this blessing, when the sheep were let out of a pond field into a trough field, now full of this loved up water, they would literally gallop up to 1 kilometre straight to the trough and fill up with this now loved up water, and then would reduce water intake when they were back into a pond field. And the same thing would happen again once they got into the next trough field. They would accelerate towards this water. So the finish of the story then is that I was able to get back to the farm, and we blessed all of the ponds. And immediately we'd done that, the sheep's behavior completely stopped and reverted to being equally happy with either water source. So we can see very direct effects, and it's fun to have an opportunity to experiment connecting with the spirit of place. This was an experience where we used homeopathy on a potato crop in Scotland. We filled a dropper bottle with malt whiskey and fresh spring water and love and everything we could imagine a potato would be happy with, and then it was sprayed at the rate of 3 drops per 100 litres at point of planting. It did create a little bit of a problem at point of harvesting and transportation, but it gave us this result. And just to be clear, this is a marginal graph. We're not starting at 0. We're already baselining here at 18 tonnes per acre, but we're in blue. And so the strips across the field after test digs with this homeopathic application gave us 27 tonnes per acre. And this was their baseline. Their normal application in this field was at 21 tonnes per acre. So you can see very substantial advantage from love in a bottle at the rate of 3 drops per 100 litres. Just following water, we see we can love it up with Dr. Emoto. We see a lot of plant applications, blessing water, try it at home, a couple of trays of seeds on the kitchen table, bless all the water and bless the seeds in one tray, and be indifferent if you can bear to be to the other. Likely you'll get about a 30% germination increase after about 2 weeks, depending on the seed crop. So definitely try this at home, because it's low tech and it is typically like a placebo in medicine, has somewhere around a 30% margin of benefit. And as Julia was saying, not just in yield, but in resilience, in pest resilience, in crop storage capacity. But just following water here, after a farm blessing in New South Wales, we're standing here on a dry creek bed that's been dry for 8 years. And historically, this would have been the only water source in the region. And so we're tying in, again, as per theme of, we seek not to step in their steps, we seek what they sought. We are the indigenous now. So this is a dry creek bed. Within 4 days of blessing this country, it was with water in the absence of a rain event, either on the land or upstream. And more bewildering than that, it only carried water to the edges of the property that we'd worked on. It was still dry on the neighbors, both up and downstream. So clearly this was not flowing water. This was water in the ground that responded to our prayers and intentions and made itself available in some, to me, unbelievable and miraculous way. Literally came to surface. And we're tight on time today, but many stories similarly. There it is. just 2-3 more randoms just to get your minds working, and then we'll have a meditation and a breakout and our question and answers. But again, slightly dramatic, and I'm giving you my best results because when the system really works, I would have clients say we've got Rolls-Royce properties, but the spark plug's not working. And so when you get the spark plugs working, it works like a Rolls-Royce. So again, as Julia and Richard were saying, when we integrate this piece, the whole system works and the whole thing just blossoms. And so applying subtle energy, awareness, healing of landscape, psychic discord from previous circumstances in New South Wales, and really deep communication with the nature spirits, with the elementals, asking them to support the crop, blessing the weather, etc. All looks good on the day. We didn't actually wear pointy hats or purple cloaks, but we were giving it our best love and our best intention. And you can see here from a previous average of 1 ton per acre and a previous best of 1.6, they yielded in that season, planting 2 weeks after our work, 2.3 tons per acre. And most importantly for me, and I think sort of tying it back again, they were the only of 10 local farms served by that agronomist where they didn't have to use pesticides to manage the Heliothus grub, which is their primary predator, because the crop was so full of beneficial insects, so full of diverse ecology, that the whole Heliothus grub looked like yummy lunch to lots of things beyond that. Let me just check my time here. Many stories, tight time today, but just wanting to let you know that by applying our minds, by applying our intuition, by literally engaging with and working directly with the subtle energetic environment, dramatic effects can get. So just a few percentage figures here for you. 60% reduction here in mastitis rate, discord there, geopathic stress, residual energies from sad and bad things in the landscape. Fix it up, cows very sensitive, very happy about that. 50% reduction in calf mortality through strengthening the spirit and family sense of cattle, just by engaging with them as a consciousness, as per Julia. If we talk to the cattle, if we talk to the animals, we engage in their relationship, we cultivate their sense of presence, their security and comfort and familiarity at a psychic energetic level that promotes their health and well-being. In this case, again, reduction in mastitis, and by communicating with an alfalfa crop that had created bloating in cattle and they'd then been removed, by communicating directly with the crop through a process of imagination, meditation, however you would language that, making sure that the crop, the alfalfa in this case, understood that it was in an agricultural process. It had thought that the cattle that were grazing it were wild predators, had put tannins, hostile metabolites into the crop, created bloating. 12 hours after a conversation literally with the crop, it changed its metabolic expression, and the cattle were able to graze it off without any further concern to their health. So literally a change in expressed physiological biology through a meditative process, communicating with the spirit of the plants and the soil. And similarly here, through conversation with an apple orchard, normally harvested 3 times a year to comply with supermarket specifications, plant whispering brought 98% of the crop all to uniform supermarket harvest specifications at once, and thereby reduced their labor costs by 2/3. And so when we're in that place where we're present ourselves, engaged coherently with the environment, we can have these effects. We can make the dragons, the meridians in the landscape happy. We can get the elementals and the gnomes happy. The fairies are happy, and then we should end up with happy plants as a consequence, and animals and thriving people, and a balanced ecosystem on account of that. So thank you for sitting through those slides. Quick quiz through, obviously trying to give you a little bit of scientific rationale, as well as circumstantial, anecdotal, what happens when you try it. And so then the opportunity is to try it at home, and maybe we'll just take a quick five minutes here for meditation before we go to breakout. And this will be very familiar to some of you. You will have done this many times. Perhaps you do this all day long, perhaps new to each other, new for some of you, but we really just are wanting to hold a space. Remember that frequency curve. When we're thinking, when our mind is in executive space, it keeps us out of that plant communication zone. When we allow our mind, or specifically posture our mind to observe, then it lets us go into our intuitional space. So, and again, echoing Richard, one of his key points, when you literally move into observational mind rather than executive mind, it's the observational mind that is open to all of these perceptions and communications. So we'll just try that here for a moment. If you'd sit comfortably and relax and shake out any tension from sitting, listening to three of us and intense slides. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to move our mind into an observational space, and we're going to do that by literally watching our breath. And we're also going to do it by feeling our pulse. So if you could find a pulse somewhere, you'll find one on your wrist, or you'll find one somewhere on your neck, but just feel a pulse and watch your breath. And we'll just do this for a minute. It can take a couple of minutes just to sort of move out a busy mind. But just as I speak, and eyes open, eyes closed, doesn't matter, but just specifically you're moving your mind into an observational space. Notice how your heartbeat feels. Notice, without trying to control it, the speed and the depth and the shape of your breath. Is it belly breathing or shallow breathing? Without trying to judge it even, just notice the shape of your breath and notice the shape of your pulse. And just allow yourself in that space to come into core awareness of self, because that's bringing us into the nature, spirit, and elemental part of our own selves. Perhaps we're a concentric unfolding of mineral, vegetable, animal, mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. Maybe it's a concentric. So perhaps the things that we're talking about are the most deep things inside of us at a certain level, or at least core to our physiology. So then moving into that space, we just first want to reaffirm our own deep sovereignty and selfhood and clarity as our own bubble here, engaged with the world. And so we can do that by loving and blessing ourselves, and just filling the bubble of ourselves with love and clarity and coherence. Really just like tuning our radio set to a preferred resonance, or listen to classical music or jazz or anything we want. We literally have the power of resonance available to us in our mind, and we can either use that through focused intention, or we can simply relax and let the heart take care of itself on autopilot. And then once we feel clear and comfortable and peaceful in ourselves, just open our minds then to the spirit of land that is most prevalent in our lives, just as Richard was inviting us to go to our most special place, going back there, whether that's land that you manage or land that you grew up in or land that you visited or land that you love. In an agricultural context, I invite farmers to connect specifically with a farm diva, a representative of the elemental and nature spirit consciousness. But these go by different names, the tutelary spirit or genius loci of place for the Greeks, the spirit of place, the overlighting diva, the overlighting angel. We can give it, as we've said, any name, but just allow our mind to connect in that observational, intuitive place, literally with a deep consciousness of the landscape, most comfortable, familiar to you. And in that opening, as per previous, we want to establish first a rapport of love. And just so opening heart-to-heart communication and blessing the space between us, so that all transactions between ourselves and other come through a space of love and peace and blessedness. We don't want to just open ourselves to random and chaotic energies in the landscape, because there's plenty of those. We want to be very specific and focused, and make sure that in a loving and graceful space, we're making a loving and graceful connection with the primary governing, organizing intelligence of the space that we're most connected with, living in and or managing. And we'll just hold a minute or two there and just observe literally what comes into mind, whether you establish a dialogue telepathically, or whether you get impressions or guidance, or whether there's simply a warm, fuzzy feeling of the love and support and nurture that comes from there. So we just spend a couple moments holding space for that, and then we'll close this meditation and this part of our presentation. Sometimes through clairvoyance, the vision, sometimes clairaudience, the hearing, sometimes claircognizance, a deep inner knowing that comes from nowhere, the intuition, the instinct, just holding space in our mind for the dialogue to occur, and knowing that vibrational consciousness is all around us, and we're able to connect to any part of it with the radio set of our minds at any time, for any purpose. Always first to say thank you, I love you, and then on from there with intention for cooperation and support. All right, I think in the interest of time, we should close that now. Please revisit this space many times on for the rest of your life. One of my teachers said, you only have to meditate half the time, Patrick. That's half of your mind all of the time. And so I would offer that. So please do include this. There's 100,000 million ways to connect. It's very individual. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It's literally personal. It's right if it's authentic, if it feels natural. And we get to see the results as the seasons unfold through the growing processes, and reflect and repeat from there. So thank you so much for your attention. I'm going to hand this back to Julia for breakouts and then plenary with the rest of our time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Yes, I've been waiting 4 years for this to happen at the Oxfordville Farming Conference, and this is the first time that this session has been accepted, and it's a lot about timing, I think, because at this particular conference, we've had so many more workshops and talks on similar vein about indigenous knowledge and changing our worldviews. So I think this has come at the right time. And thank you everyone for being part of that. So we want to move into a breakout, gently into a breakout group session, where you'll be put in with a few other people. We're going to, Leo is going to post the question, and the question is to base your discussion around is, do you have any experiences with any of these techniques or approaches being discussed? Have you experienced this yourself, or do you know someone else who has, or do you have any reflections on it? So very simple. If you just move into your breakout groups when they're formed, and that'll last for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back for discussion and questions. Thank you. So welcome back, everybody. Hope you've had a fruitful discussion. We haven't got a lot of time for a big group discussion, but obviously there's more questions raised probably, and we'll try and address some of them. I'll just say at the very end, I'm going to put a couple of slides up with contacts and links. So we're going to make those available, and Leo's also going to post those into the chat. So you don't need to, to be worried about contacts and links. We'll be providing those. If we can just ask Leo now, if you can pick out a question that you've seen or in the chat that you thought would be interesting for everyone to hear about.
Thank you so much for this. It was brilliant. Julia, Patrick, Richard, it was amazing. Thank you for your words. It was very inspiring. And we've got a couple of really interesting questions, I must say. And so one of the most voted, let's start with this first one. As part of subtle agroecologies, do you consider the use of language as an important regarding human relationships with the rest of the nature? For the whole panel.
I was going to say Patrick and Richard do come in.
Yes. Wonderful question. Thanks for whoever has been putting that in. Thanks, Leo, for putting that one up. Couple things, I think, important points with this. There's a contract of free will that people have on the planet, and the elementals, nature spirits, angels, formative forces, they mirror and pattern themselves in accordance to the expression of ourselves. They have their own independence, but the relationship is defined by how we approach them. And so ethic with this is central. I saw that in the chat also, and also specificity is important, because we engage in the way that we engage, both through the specificity of thought and the quality of feeling associated. So we want to engage in very conscious and self-aware ways. We want to be in that theta space of peace and observational mind. And we want to invite engaged dialogue rather than go into the command and control, which we can because of the nature of free will, but the consequences of that we see around us. And so two things with this. The engagement is to do with safety, respect, start with love, add intention, engage with dialogue, stay in an invitational rather than a command space, and trusting that our needs are fundamentally supported by a landscape if we allow that to happen, would be my comment on that. So just returning to first point, specificity of language. The language that we use in our mind is specific to the thoughts and feelings that we hold. The same thoughts and feelings have a different word structure, but it has a same vibrational expression at a heart, mind, telepathic level. So clarity of purpose, intention, and holding to interactive, respective dialogue rather than command, control, manipulation central to doing this process, I think. Thank you so much, Leo.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Does anyone want to, Richard, do you want to add something to that?
No, I think if you could pick another question, because we haven't got much time and want to address a few.
We can move forward. So another one that was highly voted: to what extent are subtle agroecologies conceptualized as process of relating outwards? Example, to the land, to plants. To what extent is it also about relating inwards to ourselves, our part, our bodily process?
Patrick, I think again you.
I won again. One of the classical sort of aphorisms with these kinds of understandings is as within, so without, and as above, so below. So there's a deep understanding, I think, shared, around the world, that the internal is but a reflection of the external, and everything ultimately comes down to relationship, whether it's person to person, person to place, person to plant, person to animal, and all of the things that we well understand, through mediation processes and psychology, I think are exactly representative of what we would consider metaphysics and spirituality at whatever level. We're really looking for right relationship with all things, and a coherent integrated system that we can participate in and celebrate with. And so body, mind and spirit, coherence of thought and action, I think totally, if it's a thriving system, we're thriving in it. But I think the critical thing again is relationship with, including relationship with self. Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. One more, Leo.
Sorry, I got no, I got it here. There was one question that people were interested in. People were asking if we can improve the spirit of the herd of a cattle by blessing them, can we use the same methods on group of people?
Yes. Super question. Saw that in the chat too. Thanks for picking it up, Leo. The simple, but I think actually the only download on this, as far as I can understand it, is literally whatever we give loving attention to thrives. And we can identify anything at all, whether it's ourselves, our partners, our children, our parents, but we can be as collective as we want. We're all familiar with, effectively, in various ways, blessing the spirit of the sports team, blessing the spirit of the business, blessing the spirit of the community. The Fountain International Group is a worldwide movement for people blessing the communities that they live in by pouring unconditional love into some central point in the community. Started in Brighton, with dramatic effects of reducing street violence and crime and so forth. And so absolutely whatever we place our loving attention to, large or small, collective, personal or regional, seems to have a good effect. And I think lots of people around the planet are onto this and organizing various local and global ways to coordinate loving attention, defining a baseline resonance for us all to live in and thrive with.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And we're going to have to finish at exactly 5:30. And I just want to share some contact details with you. So if I can go down to the end of these slides, some contact details here, which obviously will be recorded, so you can go back to these. It's Patrick's website where there are books and courses he's running, and you can communicate with me. Also visit Richard at his farm. Leo's posting these links into the chat as well. There is a book on subtle agroecologies. This will be out a little bit later this new year. It is an academic book. Sort of unfortunately, that means it's going to be expensive, but after a year or so, a softback will come out, which is cheaper. But if you work at a university, if you can ask the library to buy it, and then other people will be able to access it too. And the first chapter is going to be open access as well. So if you keep in contact with me, I can send you the first chapter when it's published. So please do look at that. We've got some, Patrick's one of the authors, there are 28 authors in this book. 12 different countries around the world. And then I just wanted to say that there are lots of organizations doing this, and this is just a selection of them from different countries. You know, once you start looking at this, you'll find that there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of work going on. You know, the drummers we heard at the plenary session, that's Shumei Natural Agriculture, etc. So, you know, do go back and have a look at this slide as well and follow up. And you'll find links in your own country, other links as well. So, you know, this is just to say that this is very widespread. It's just a bit under the radar still, and not surprisingly, since industrial agriculture is still quite a dominant force. So I think we're going to be cut off very soon. So I just wanted to say thank you to all the, to Richard and Patrick, to all of you for coming here, to Leo. Thank you to everybody for being present at this momentous workshop. Thank you very much.